Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week starts off a brand new month, so that means it's time for another issue of Spawn, with Spawn number 34. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in August of 1995, we can see here on the cover Clown in the sewers, well, Violator in his clown form in the sewers if you want to get real specific about it. And he's got a bloody knife and also a disembodied head that he's wearing on his hand as a puppet. Now, this is a bit of a nod to the events that took place in the original Violator miniseries. If you'd like to know more about that, you can check out the videos I have on that miniseries in my Spawn miniseries playlist. But I like the fact that Greg gave a little nod to that, and considering that Greg was also the one penciling the third issue of that miniseries, it's nice that he's doing a little bit of throwback on that. But overall, I think this is just a really good cover. I like the fact that it's, not just a picture of the clown, it's Clown with a completely fleshed out background around him. You guys know how much I like that. Story, Todd McFarlane. Art, Greg Capullo, Todd McFarlane. Copy editor and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff, Quinn Suppley, and Ollie Optics. Special thanks to Kevin Conrad, Chance Wolfe, and Julia Simmons. We can see here on the first page that the Violator is underneath the surface of the water in the sewers, this coming hot off of the heels of the battle that he just had with Spawn in issue number 33. However, he's being grabbed by his horns by a mysterious set of hands. During this, we also get a narration that we find out a few things about the Violator's backstory that previously we didn't know. We learned a lot about the Violator's presumed backstory during the Violator miniseries, although it's questionable how much of this was actual fact and how much of this was embellishment that the Violator was telling, or just flat out lies in that sense, to the kids that he was paying to listen to him in the alleyways. And in this instance, we start to see some of the shortcomings of the Violator, some of the feelings of perhaps insignificance or self-doubt that he would necessarily have. It states here in this narration that the Violator has constantly been trying to avoid dealing with the fact that his existence serves no actual purpose, and that the only way that he can get around this is by trying to serve and please his master, the Mabulja, which is a job that he puts himself full-fledged all the way into, to the point where he's eventually given the position of Spawn Warden, which is the demon whose job it is to train and get all of the spawns, new hell spawns, ready for their prospective roles in the war against heaven. Prior to this, we never knew that job had an actual title to it. But as this has been going on, Violator has become more and more disillusioned with this job, as he believes that the true Hellborn are much better served as the soldiers in this army than these damned souls who have been condemned to hell and given the powers of Hellspawn. And he's starting to question, where exactly he fits into all of this and why exactly he's working so hard to give, other people the chances and opportunities that he believes should rightfully go to him and others like him. We then see the Violator pulled up out of the water by the mysterious figure. Now, presumably, this is the same mysterious figure that we saw in issue 33, watching the battle between Violator and Spawn from the shadows. As he yanks Violator up and sets him on the ledge inside of the sewer, he stands over the Violator as Violator starts to get back onto his feet and puke up a ton of sewer water. He then yells at the mysterious figure, stating, "I didn't need your help, go ahead and run off," stating that he can breathe both air and water. We don't know if this is necessarily true, but it does seem unlikely that drowning would be a way that you could kill an actual demon. He then states that the mysterious man is lucky that he's not in the mood for casual disembowelment, making reference to the idea that he would likely rip the man's heart out and eat it. We also get more of the narration backstory to what's going on with the Violator throughout these two pages. stating that Violator had decided to become more ruthless and more aggressive in the way that he antagonized new hell spawns and pushed them to the brink of madness and made them essentially better as hell soldiers for the war in heaven, which is how he actually got the name Violator bestowed upon him by Mabalja, which, again, I didn't realize that. This is something that we're just learning in this issue, that this is not just his name. This was like a grandiose type of title that he got for how good of a job he was doing. Unfortunately, he didn't continue to do that good of a job because he eventually let his own jealousies and insecurities get the better of him, to the point where he started going well outside of the bounds of what he was supposed to be doing, as we saw in earlier issues, where he starts killing all the mafia dons and then starts getting away from what he's being instructed to do by the Mabalja, which is what got him banished to Earth, and for a while his powers as the Violator taken away, making him essentially a human. This, of course, is something that the Violator was not happy about, and he was doing everything in his power to correct. However, he now, having regained his powers, has decided that the only way that he can get back into the good graces of the Mabalja is to basically just terrorize Spawn and, torture him both physically and emotionally. And he's got a plan that he's formulated. Unfortunately, he was not counting on Spawn's costume having metamorphized when it did, and that's kind of throwing a wrench in the whole thing. So now he's got to figure out exactly what he needs to do from here to make all the wheels keep turning the way that he needs them to. We then see Violator transform back into the clown and collapse with a big fart in the middle of the sewer, as he starts to talk out loud to himself, stating that things are really like a problem right now. And the whole idea that Spawn's uniform has transmuted this early is really screwing up his plans. And he even states that Spawn's new uniform could really do some actual damage to him and hurt him in a lot of ways. So he's actually kind of hesitant to go up against Spawn head on again, and realizes that he now has to figure out a way to change his plan to antagonize Spawn from a distance as he slinks back into the sewers, trying to figure out exactly where he needs to go from here. Meanwhile, back at Grandma Blake's house, we see that Wanda has stopped in for a visit with Cyan. This, of course, is something that Grandma Blake is excited about and happy to see her great-granddaughter and her granddaughter show up. She starts to catch up with the two of them, asking how things are going with her and Terry. Wanda explains that Terry's doing better now that the whole murder fiasco has been put behind them, and that she's very busy trying to get things organized for a fundraiser for a children's charity. And Grandma Blake actually states, I'm so glad to hear all these things. I really hope that you never lose that charitable giving side of you that I love so much. Later on that night, back in the city proper, we see Spawn hanging out on the ledge of a tall building, surveying the city below, and Spawn has taken an interest in a young boy named Tyrone, who is portrayed here as a victim of the city, as we see him walking through the streets surrounded by porn theaters and prostitutes and other sorts of ne'er-do-wells that a young 10-year-old boy probably should not be around. It's stated that there's very little that he hasn't seen in his young life. As he's walking down the sidewalk, he's suddenly grabbed by a hand from an alleyway and pulled into the shadows, as there's a voice saying, "We've been waiting for you." That voice belongs to a drug dealer known as Stinky, who states that Tyrone's been messing with him and that he doesn't like people messing with him and besmirching his good name, and that, he wants to make sure that Tyrone realizes the position that Stinky is in. He then states that his drugs, which assumedly is maybe cocaine, but possibly something else, go for an average rate of about $300 a piece, but that he's going to charge Tyrone instead $600. Tyrone protests, but seeing as how he's surrounded by three large men that he can't hope to fight off on his own, he essentially makes a split-second decision and decides to pay Stinky his money in full and take the drugs. And then Stinky says, yeah, now get out of here. I got another appointment to get to. The whole thing is being witnessed by Spawn, and Spawn is not too happy about what he's seen, as he believes that this young child is being exploited by these three drug-dealing gangsters, and he wants to put a stop to that. Also, I'd like to point out, I really like what Greg did here with having the cape act as border filler. It's a simple touch that probably didn't take him that much time, but it really adds a lot of flair to what would otherwise just be nothing space up here. And I hope that that's something that continues going forward, where we don't have like tons of negative space that's not being filled in with anything. The appointment that Stinky was in such a hurry to get to is in fact a mud wrestling match that is taking place between two nearly nude women in the back of a porn store. Stinky makes his way to his private booth where he watches through a peephole, we all know what he's doing. However, the whole time he's stating, oh yeah, come on, do it to me good. And at this point, Stinky finds out that he is not alone in this booth as he thought, as he's grabbed from behind by Spawn, who says, oh, I will. The noise of the women wrestling is meant to muffle out the sounds that are coming from inside of the booths. However, this is serving its intended purpose to also drown out the sound of Spawn basically disemboweling and tearing Stinky apart limb from limb. Unfortunately, it does nothing to prevent them from noticing the huge spray of blood coming out from Stinky's peephole, as the two women in the match suddenly stop as they're terrified by what they're seeing, understandably so. We're then teleported to the 8th circle of hell, where we see the Mabolja hovering over a pool of blood, watching all of the events that just transpired with Spawn, as he states that, you can delude yourself all you want, Spawn, but there's no way that you can escape my grasp. And then he actually brings up a little point that kind of gets into an aspect of like predestination, of the idea that the seeds of death, evil, and blackness were planted in Al Simmons at birth, and that he was never going to be able to escape his true nature, which brings up the possibility that Al was always destined for hell and the life as a hell spawn. Now, this, of course, is just something that's being muttered by the Mabolja and is not necessarily confirmed through the story, but I thought it was an interesting point for Todd to include, and it's kind of thought-provoking in a lot of aspects. We then get back to the 3 news reports. Again, Todd at this point still has not changed from using the actual CNN and E! Entertainment logos. This will happen eventually. And they're all kind of reporting on the failings of the current president, who in 1995 would have been Bill Clinton, and his inability to broker a peace deal between the Bosnians and the Serbians. However, they're also then following that story with a report about the murder of Stinky in the porn store, which makes no sense, especially for a company like CNN. Like, the idea that you're going to be reporting on international peace treaties on a nationally syndicated news network, and then also be like, oh, and by the way, this one random drug dealer was murdered in New York. We should probably talk about that too. Makes no sense at all. Like, that would never have happened. The only place where it does make sense is down here with our old buddy Thurston Burns, who has, of course, just completely looked down the end of his nose at the new presidential administration, constantly criticizing the president and his inabilities, and then brings up the murder to state, oh yeah, here back in the States, in New York, we know how to handle this kind of stuff. Get in, kill a guy, get out. That's how you do it, being his normal firebrand self. Meanwhile, later on in the evening at the CIA office building, we see Jason Wynn working into the wee morning hours, doing his more illicit dealings far away from prying eyes who may blow the whistle on him, when suddenly he's interrupted by a voice that says, wow, deceit and deception, it gives me such a warm, squishy feeling. Wynn, understandably shocked that anyone else would be in his office, states, who's there? The voice states, it doesn't matter. What does matter is you're going to be working for me starting today, and I hope that's permanent. We then see that the voice belongs to none other than the Violator in his clown form, of course. as he states, I've done my homework on you, Jason, and I feel like you're perfect for the jobs that I need done to deal with a few of the common enemies we have. So are you in or out? And then he realizes, wait a minute, you don't have a choice. But that's more your problem. Wynn immediately tries to call for security, but he's informed by the Violator that the phones are all dead. And he then says, speaking of dead, I've got a little problem that is also a thorn in your side named Spawn. He then states to Wynn, combining Spawn with Terry Fitzgerald, Police Chief Banks, and Billy Kincaid, etc., you get my drift. So what do you say? At this point, Wynn realizes that this goofy little clown guy knows way more about him than he should, and decides to light a cigarette and listen to what he has to say. As the clown walks past him to sit at Jason's desk, he also tells him that he's made sure that the camera feed to Jason's office that's being observed by his rent-a-cops is just showing Jason here alone in his office as if nothing's wrong at all. It's just a little magic trick that he does, but that Jason probably wouldn't understand. However, seeing as what Jason's been through, having been transformed into the anti-Spawn, and also having worked with the psychoplasm to create a research facility used by the CIA and trying to make weapons with it for the US government, he's much more receptive to the things that Violator's saying than Violator may realize, so he just says, try me. At this point, Violator states that Spawn has become a real problem for him and that he is unable to deal with that problem directly because of how advanced his armor has become, and that actually pisses him off. So he instead needs Wynn to come in and go after all of the people that Spawn cares about as a means to try and get Spawn's psyche out of the game and make him essentially trip up. This is something that he needs done over a long period of time, and as a reward, the Violator says that he'll make sure that Wynn will be given all sorts of riches, but will also no longer have to pander to the current president. At this point, the Violator casually pulls a file out of his jacket and starts to read off one of Wynn's illicit dealings, which involved Wynn supplying weapons to a country who was actively attacking one of the US's allies, which gave a defense contractor a huge boost in revenue, and also netted Wynn a cool $12 million that he's got tucked away in a Swiss account. Wynn realizes now that he's playing with someone who knows way too much information about him and can actually destroy him if he chooses to, so he just says, get to your point. And the point that Clown brings up, or Violator, is that he wants Terry Fitzgerald, who has recently transferred to Wynn's department, to be treated as a new friend to Jason Wynn. He wants him to make sure that he goes out of his way to be the nicest person possible to Fitzgerald and gain his confidence, while at the same time putting the screws to everyone that Terry Fitzgerald holds dear in sort of a Jekyll and Hyde type of scenario. He wants him to go after his wife, his child, his granny, and that these things will drive Spawn absolutely batty, and as a reward, he'll eventually tell Jason Wynn exactly who Spawn is, and that when he does, it's going to give Wynn a heart attack. The next day at the hospital, where Twitch is recovering from the injuries he sustained during the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries, if you'd like to know more about that miniseries, you can check out my videos on it in my Spawn miniseries playlist. We see that Sam is out getting a coffee in the hallway when he happens to notice a drop-dead gorgeous woman walking up the hall. He tries to play it cool but can't help himself as he puts his foot in his mouth trying to hit on her. However, she doesn't seem too offended by it and simply states, I'm here to see someone, I'm sorry, but it was nice to meet you anyway. And Sam is just like, oh, nice to meet you too, hope we see each other again. As we also see a bunch of darts continuously hitting a bullseye in the background during this entire interaction. After getting his coffee and a handful of snacks, Sam then runs back to Twitch's room, all giddy, trying to tell him about this gorgeous woman that he's now seen and how beautiful a pair of breasts that she has, as Twitch looks over at him, and then Sam stops in his tracks to see this same beautiful woman sitting on the bed as she's conversing with Twitch. And that's because this woman is named Helen, and she's actually Twitch's wife. who Sam has never met. Although, given the fact that the two of them have been partners for nearly a decade, it seems likely that he would have at least seen a picture of her at some point, but apparently he had no idea that Twitch's wife was this gorgeous woman. She excuses herself, not taking the time to address the fact that Sam has just made an ass of himself, and tells Twitch that she has to go pick up one of their children from school. Sam then tells Twitch, man, you're a lucky guy. You have a really beautiful, classy wife. Twitch thanks him and then asks him what kind of progress he's made on the investigation into Chief Banks. Sam tells Twitch that after doing a little digging into the phone records after they gave him the file stating that they knew that he was involved in the Billy Kincaid murders, that Sam has realized Banks has been making a lot of calls to a confidential number at CIA headquarters. And given the time of night that these calls are going through, it seems like something that wouldn't have been witnessed by a lot of people who work there, and that there wouldn't be a whole lot of people who know about whatever's going on with Chief Banks. Meanwhile, back at the CIA headquarters, Jason Wynn, still in his office, suddenly gets an unexpected call from the president, who is thanking him for drawing up the plan to negotiate the deal with the Bosnians and Serbians, and that it worked wonders, and that he can't thank Jason enough for the hard work that he's done, and how grateful he is to have Jason working to serve America's interest. Jason, confusingly, says, well, thank you, sir, you're welcome, and then hangs up the phone and tries to figure out exactly what the president's talking about, as he didn't do any of these things. However, his phone then rings immediately, and on the other line is none other than the Violator, who says, hey, I hope the president just thanked you about all that stuff that I did for you. I hope you understand what the deal is now, and I look forward to working with you. Make sure you take care of our buddy Terry. Toodaloo. This, of course, infuriates Wynn, as he now realizes the corner that he's backed into. He has no way of rejecting the offer that Violator made him, and he's now essentially a puppet working for a third party, which is a position that he is not used to being in. And this also spells out a new terrorizing alliance for Spawn, as before all of the villains that Spawn was facing were kind of working towards their own ends, and the fact that now two of them are working together against him is going to make things really difficult for Spawn going forward. Speaking of Spawn, back in the alleyways, he is now having a conversation with the mysterious Cagliostro, as Spawn says, I don't know exactly what the Violator was thinking, just suddenly attacking me and then disappearing doesn't make any sense. And Cog tells him that's because he wasn't paying attention, which Spawn seems to be confused about. Then Cog tells him he's trying to confuse you and distract you, and when he does that, your instincts take over, which is exactly what he wants. He then tells Spawn that he and Violator are two peas in a pod in that sense. Spawn immediately snaps back, stating, I'm not like him. However, Cog reminds him that, your latest actions say otherwise, referring to him having just murdered Stinky, his hands still covered in Stinky's blood. But Spawn says, Stinky was preying on children and turning them into his own kind, and I just sent a loud message out to the others that are like him. But Cog rebuttals precisely. That's exactly what Hell wants, and that's exactly what happens when you revert back to using your training on someone that doesn't stand a chance. They want you to act like this. And then Spawn replies by stating, well, in some cases, I guess, then Hell's right. This, of course, makes Cog a little bit angry and frustrated, as he says, Al, you're making this way too easy for them. Here, let me tell you a little bit about that boy Tyrone. He's actually the guy who runs that block. He's been selling guns for ages. He's been in and out of juvenile detention centers since he was 6 years old. And he's been linked to being involved in 2 out-and-out murders, but because of his age, he was never prosecuted. And he wasn't being strong-armed or anything by Stinky. He was actually going to use Stinky as a new supplier because his own drug business has been slipping. And then he realizes that, Spawn was just playing right into Mabalja and the Violator's hands. Spawn then realizes this as well and states, then, what am I supposed to do here? And Cog tells him what you need to do is focus and stop letting them dictate what's going on in your life. Stop just reverting to your training. Remember that you were assassinated by someone. It wasn't just random that you were killed in the way that you were. And that if you were working towards trying to discover the actual truth of the matter, you wouldn't be so easily manipulated. Spawn then starts to sulk and just state, oh man, this wasn't supposed to happen. None of this was supposed to happen, as he falls into one of his normal Spawn pity parties that we've seen so frequently throughout the first 33 issues. However, Cog rebuttals by saying, well, maybe that's not the way things were supposed to turn out, but it's the way things are, and that makes these things your problem. And if you don't deal with these problems, the people that you care about are going to fall prey to evil, as we see Spawn's power level currently sitting at 6,887. Meanwhile, back at the CIA headquarters, we see Terry Fitzgerald taking advantage of some time alone in the late night office to try and do some digging, find some files or any kind of evidence really that will link the events of his past where he was framed for murder and everyone was going after him back to Jason Wynn. However, he realizes this is a daunting task as Wynn's no dummy and has doubled back over his tracks multiple times to try and make sure that there's no clear-cut path that can link any of his wrongdoings back to him. However, in going through the files and being so diligently engrossed in his work, he fails to realize that he's not totally alone in the office and doesn't see this familiar silhouette in the window of the door behind him. As the door opens, Terry flips around and is shocked to see none other than Jason Wynn himself entering the room. He quickly comes up with a cover story of the fact that he was just finishing up some paperwork before he went home. But Wynn interrupts him stating, yes, I've noticed how hard you've been working lately, and I very much appreciate it. I'm really impressed with what a great job you've been doing. Of course, this is all at the behest of the Violator to befriend Terry Fitzgerald. And Terry is kind of shocked by this and says, well, thank you, sir. Wynn then states, there's something else I actually need you to help me with. There's someone who I believe is a mole in this department who's been trying to find a way to undermine my position and come after me and potentially steal some files. And I need your help in digging out this mole and exposing them. And since you're new here, I really feel like I'm more likely capable of trusting you than anyone else. So how about you do that for me? Now, this, of course, flies in the face of the fact that Wynn has been trying to prove that this was Terry Fitzgerald doing these things all along, which he's never been able to do, and that's because it wasn't Terry Fitzgerald who was doing any of these things. It was Spawn. And Terry for a long time has believed, Wynn for a long time has believed that Terry was in fact Spawn. This, of course, is not the case, and Wynn is just kind of grasping at straws in this instance because he doesn't understand how on earth Spawn could have known the things that he knew. He doesn't understand that Spawn is the one who stole all the weapons from the depot. And he just hasn't actually put the puzzle pieces together to realize that Terry was never his enemy at all, but he's so focused on Terry being the only culprit that he's tried to basically railroad him to the point where Terry has in fact become an enemy of Wynn, which is kind of hilarious that Wynn is the person responsible for, essentially creating some other person that he has to watch out for due to his own paranoia. But these are things that we're going to have to talk about when we get to the next issue. On the next page, we see Image info. Once again, nothing really to see here, just a blurb about upcoming things with Image Comics and new comics that are releasing way back in August of 1995. So obviously the information's a bit outdated. We then reach the spawning ground, the letter section where fans can write in criticizing or asking questions or praising Todd McFarlane. And there were only two letters I found super interesting. One was a letter from a reader who was a little bit critical of the fact that the new costume design, which Todd had been teasing for a few months, wasn't really that drastically different from the original costume design, and that they expected it to be, something very new and unique. And Todd replies by stating that, he didn't want to completely get away from the original costume design. He wanted it to be something that still felt familiar, but had been changed aesthetically to a certain degree, which I understand, but I can also understand that you're not going to please everyone. And for some people, they wanted to see a more drastic change and may have been let down when they realized that, it's still kind of the same costume. It's just a slightly different version of the same costume. The other letter I found interesting came from someone who brought up the points of the way that Todd writes his book and how they felt it was more grounded in reality and that type of thing, comparing it to some criticisms of Batman. And Todd responds by stating that one of the things that he actually doesn't like about Batman is that Batman never kills the Joker, and that in him not killing the Joker, he's essentially partially responsible for all of the future victims that the Joker has every time he escapes from Arkham Asylum. Excuse me. But to me, I feel like this is kind of flawed logic, because the only person who's really responsible for the Joker's actions is himself. And Batman also, relies on the idea that if he crosses the line of declaring himself judge, jury, and executioner, it's a line he can never come back from. And he doesn't want to cross that line because he still believes in the justice system and giving people the opportunity to defend themselves in a court of law. And despite the fact that obviously the Joker is guilty of murdering hundreds of people, that he's still entitled to that right like anyone else. And, this is kind of one of those things where I feel like Todd's missing the point a little bit. No matter what, Bruce Wayne is never truly responsible for the actions of the Joker. Yes, he could stop the Joker by killing him and making sure that he never murders again. But ultimately, the decision to commit those murders lies with the Joker, and he's the one who's really in the wrong from the get-go. And expecting someone else to correct that wrong on the behalf of society at their own detriment is kind of a reach in a lot of aspects, at least from my opinion. We then get a couple of pinups, one from Mike Dringenberg and another one by Mark Pasella and Kevin Conrad. Now, the one by Conrad and Pasella is actually, really well done, but it's nothing all that special. It's just Spawn leaping through the air using his powers, fighting some sort of water monster of sorts. I actually like this other one by Dringenberg a lot more. It's such a unique stylization of the Violator where it's familiar but different enough that it's, it feels like a new interpretation of the Violator in a lot of ways. And yes, while his proportions are all out of whack, I feel like that actually fits this, otherworldly demonic entity. And I really like just, how well done this look for the Violator is. I really think it fits the character well. Now, I am disappointed that there's literally no background to this picture at all. I don't know why you wouldn't put something behind him at least, but, whatever. It's just a pinup. It really doesn't matter that much. I also like this whole little thing of where he's like kind of holding on to what could possibly be Spawn's cape and also what could possibly be Spawn's skull, which is just a cool little like artistic touch. I enjoyed that. We then reach the end cap section, which is all about upcoming McFarlane toys and release dates and availability and whatnot. But this one is really important because this brings up exactly why Todd Toys became McFarlane Toys, which is a story I actually didn't know. So according to this, what happened was McFarlane was contacted by the Mattel toy company, who informed him that they had a doll named Todd who was part of the Barbie toy line. And they were concerned that him calling his company Todd Toys would create confusion in the market and that people might think that this was somehow associated with Todd from the Barbie line. Although I don't know how the hell you could look at any of McFarlane's toys and think that it had any kind of crossover to do with Barbie. That being said, I think it's pretty clear that they were just trying to put the screws to him because he was a new competitor in the market and they felt like they could just kind of throw their legislative or litigative, might against him. However, Todd, I think, kind of realized what they were doing. And while he could have gone to court against them and probably won, being that the idea that you could make any connection between these two things is kind of laughable at best. And obviously, Mattel can't copyright the name Todd. It's too ubiquitous. He just decided to instead change the name of his company to McFarlane Toys, which was a lot cheaper and a lot easier. And didn't require him to spend months or potentially even years litigating in court against Mattel, who obviously, especially in the mid-90s, had far more money and legal resources than Todd McFarlane did, which to me seems like a really smart move on his part. He also talks about the release of some new vehicles, one of which being the Violator Chopper that comes with the second version of the Violator Bendy figure, which we can see the original and the second version right next to each other here. The second version, obviously a lot bigger. And he talks about how few of these were actually ordered by different retailers. And this makes sense, because while I knew of this toy's existence and I've seen pictures of it, I've never seen this toy in real life. Never once, not back in the 90s, not at comic book stores, never at a convention. I have never come across a Violator Chopper, toy in package, or even loose, if I'm being honest, which leads me to believe that this thing might be worth some money. Now, granted, I haven't looked that up on eBay, so I could be talking out of my ass, and it maybe is worth about what it cost back in 95. But if you have one of these, congratulations, because you're one of the few. We then see an advertisement for Spawn Blood Feud. As I stated earlier, if you'd like to know more about the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries, you can check it out in my Spawn miniseries playlist. And then we get an order form which allowed you to order directly from Todd McFarlane Productions Incorporated to get comic books and toys and trading cards. And I really appreciate the fact that Todd decided to put this at the end of the book so that if you did want to cut this out and send off this form to mail away and order any of these things, you didn't have to destroy one of the pages of the actual story to do so. On the last page of the book, we get an advertisement for Wizard number 50, which has an article, A Day in the Life of Todd McFarlane, within its pages. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Parts Unknown from Knight Press. I've never seen one of these books ever. It was apparently created by a man named Bo Smith and Brad Gorby. I would like to, however, congratulate Bo Smith's parents on spelling his name correctly when they named him. And that was Spawn number 34. Overall, I thought this was a fantastic book. I really liked that we have a new mysterious character that we don't know anything about living in the sewers. I like the idea that we've been given a lot more backstory about the Violator and learning more of what his motivations are. I also really like the whole thing with Violator putting the screws to Jason Wynn and forcing Jason to come and work for him and do his bidding in an attempt to essentially unify some of the people who were going after Spawn to work towards the ends of the Violator. And I also really like how we were, kind of misled with the story of what was going on with Tyrone, and shown later on that, in fact, Spawn was just completely wrong in his assumptions, and it was him once again playing into what hell wants him to do, because he's just too busy following his instincts instead of trying to actually do some hardcore soul searching and problem solving and digging to find out exactly who is coming after him and why. I think all of these story points actually got put together really well in this book, for as many of them as there were. And overall, up until this point, feels kind of one of the more well-written books that Todd has put out in the Spawn series. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may be that you didn't like this issue at all, you thought all the story points were stupid, and you thought that the writing suffered. But if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.